We are on a UK speaking tour, and we have been on this thing for the last 2 weeks. We've gone to 7 cities, 8 cities by now, and London is still yet to happen. But what we have been talking about in most of these places is the radical wing of the Black Power movement. And we distinguished the radical wing of the Black Power movement because there were actually at least two wings. One was a cultural and nationalist wing, so poetry, black poetry, plays, and so forth and so on. Newspapers and so forth that raised the consciousness of black people. And then you had the wing, which was the revolutionary wing, whether it was the Black Panther Party, or whether it was the League of Revolutionary Black Workers, which was a revolutionary black syndicalist organization in Detroit, or local groups, because the Black Power movement touched so many local communities, and they had their own forms of organization. It's important to understand that. Just as it left the shores of the United States and touched and politically educated millions of black and oppressed peoples all over the world. But we're going to specifically talk about the Black Panther Party, and we're going to talk about the movement that I was a part of that led to the Black Panther Party, and that in fact led to Black Power as a political and social ideology in the first place. And I always made the distinction that there were two wings of the civil rights movement. You could make a demarcation line from 1955 to 1965, a 10-year period. And the Black Power movement would be from 65 to, I don't know, 75, and probably a little bit beyond that. Wouldn't be so neat to say it, but basically that's what we're talking about. And the original movement of Dr. Martin Luther King and all of that, which happened with the Montgomery bus boycott. Understand that historically you had a similar boycott here that was inspired by the Montgomery bus boycott. And it was led by adults, it was led by Christian pastors and all that kind of thing. But the movement that arose in 1960, that ultimately became the most militant wing of the civil rights period, with the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, but starting basically with a spontaneous movement in 1960 of 4 young black men going into a department store lunch counter in Greensboro, North Carolina. That movement was an entirely different movement. It wasn't led by Dr. King. It wasn't influenced by any of the so-called black civil rights leaders or any of the Christian pastors or any of that. It was an independent or autonomous movement of that period. And it was wholly a youth-based movement. All the leaders, such as there were, and all the people who did the activism were young people, 20 years older and under that. Teenagers, and in my case, I got active when I was 12 years old. And when the sit-ins came to my hometown, they took on a different character. One is because the Ku Klux Klan started in Tennessee originally, at the end of the American Civil War in at the end of the Civil War, 1865, it started around 1870 with white racist planters. So it was almost inevitable when the struggle broke out in Chattanooga, it was going to be violent. And also, it was going to be resisted. White racists were going to be resisted because that city had had years of organizing by black people, black activists, that was not influenced by the black pastors and the rest of the pretty conservative wing of the civil rights movement. So in 1960, the black students go into town and they take over the department stores in sit-ins. And white racialists come out and they throw things on them and they spit on them and they hit them and all this kind of stuff. But what happened there that was different from most places is that they didn't turn the other cheek. They got up and they started fighting these racists. And they mopped the floor with them. They shocked the racists so bad that many of them ran out of there, the ones that could get out of there, and their heads were bloodied and everything else. And they had not seen black people in this period attack or fight back, and it shocked them. And then the police, of course, arrested all of those black people who were there and put them in paddy wagons and drove them off to jail. But as soon as they were taken away, a new group of young black people ran into the department store and took their place. And so this thing kept growing and growing and growing, and eventually it economically broke the back of racial segregation, this form of racial segregation that dealt with public accommodations. You know, they wouldn't feed black people at restaurants. You couldn't get even a glass of water without something. You had a white fountain, and the white folks had a white fountain, you had a so-called black fountain where there's something spit in it. And on and on, you know, so it's a racial segregation in society, almost like apartheid in South Africa, very similar. And so the movement came into existence, and, you know, at that stage, the earlier movement was pretty much a middle class affair, whereas the student movement had both students as well as youth, street youth, and I was one of those. And we attached ourselves to the movement, and we practiced defense. We started fighting the cops, and fighting the Klansmen, and throwing rocks and bottles, and whatever else we had to do to fight back, to beat back the system. And we won that. We won that particular victory. The sit-ins swept the South all over, and we won that particular victory. But we realized, and more importantly, a very important black woman organizer, Ella Baker, realized the importance of this movement. And she had worked in the mainstream civil rights groups and all this stuff. And she had serious political differences with Dr. King because she was a radical. She didn't want to hear anything, any garbage. She was a radical. She demanded respect. She was just an all-around tough sister. And so she called for a meeting to be held in North Carolina that year. And to that meeting came some 100, 150, 200 youth organizers. And there the discussion was about building a new movement. Now, Dr. King and some of the older civil rights activists came, and they were pushing to make this new group into an auxiliary of the civil rights movement. And Sister Baker was instrumental in ideologically defeating that position and holding that the youth had already created a new movement. They did not have to answer to Dr. King or any of these so-called charismatic black leaders. They did not have to answer to them at all. And so the idea was to build a new organization. And the new organization was the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee. And many of the things that have been attributed to Dr. King and to his movement were in fact won by the students and the youth in the South. And some of these people were not from the South. Some of them weren't even black, but they came to become part of the struggle against the segregation in the South. And of course, the Ku Klux Klan was vicious during this period, and they were bombing churches and bombing schools and bombing the homes of activists and just killing people, not just activists, just killing black people generally, and had been doing that for quite some time, just to instill fear and terror in the black population. And when these activists came and started working with these people in these rural areas, you know, the thing about, and let's just be clear about it, college students have an air of superiority when they deal with poor and working class people. And so they came with the idea, smug idea, that they knew what these people should have. And only to find out that the people themselves were acutely aware of what they should have, in terms of, and acutely aware of the kind of nature of the struggle that needed to take place. And more importantly, they knew exactly who was who and what was what, which the students didn't know. They didn't know anything. They just came there. And so the politics ultimately developed inside the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee that it was the masses of people who set the terms of the struggle. And this is extremely important because you don't see this today. You don't see movements come into existence that don't have charismatic leaders. In fact, most of the movements that are in existence today are totally based on so-called leaders. And they're not based on the demands of the people or on the struggles and life histories of the people themselves and what they want. And so SNCC was a new kind of organization in that it followed the masses and had the mass line. They had plenty of groups claimed to have some mass line, but this actually was a mass line, but this was based on what the people wanted. And so SNCC, through the years, started adopting different positions on how to deal with the Klan, how to deal with segregation. They started realizing around about 64, 65, that although the civil rights movement had won certain victories, you know, the right to vote, basic democratic rights, they had won those, but they had not destroyed racism. They had not ended the war in Vietnam where black people were being chewed up by the American military machine to oppress another people of color. They started realizing this, and their ideology started advancing and becoming more militant. It really accelerated when they met Malcolm X twice. Once in, I think this both was in 1964 or 63. They met him in Ghana, West Africa, doing a tour there. They met him and they talked at length about the role of youth and black power and all what became black power. The radical ideology that became black power. And they talked about this, and they met again in Selma, Alabama during the protests there, or right before the protests there. And he influenced these young people to a major degree, to the extent, in fact, where they dropped nonviolence as a political ideology and certainly as a strategy and tactic. They dropped that and they went over to armed self-defense. They felt like Malcolm always argued that black people had a right of self-defense against racist authorities as well as racist paramilitary organizations like the Ku Klux Klan. And so he put this emphasis that they should rethink their strategy and their tactics. And I'm giving you this as a way of understanding how a group like the Black Panther Party came along later. And the Black Panther Party, you know, they said, well, it's the most militant wing of Black Party. Well, it didn't drop out of the sky. It came from somewhere. And where it came from was the so-called Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, which became itself a black radical organization, and then a revolutionary movement, which merged with the Black Panther Party when it was created in 1966 or 67. There's about. So SNCC started armed self-defense in the places where it had campaigns. It started telling black people to arm themselves against the Ku Klux Klan. It started organizing a new movement, even had the symbol of the Leaping Black Panther that people are aware of, especially in Lowndes County, Alabama. Lowndes County, Alabama was a racist hellhole. And I think it's southeast Alabama is where it's located. But it was a racist hellhole. People had been murdered there, as they had been in other parts of the South, but to silence black people, to prevent them from enjoying any rights whatsoever. You know, you say, well, if voting changed things, that, you know, it'd be against the law. Well, it was against the law, and people were getting killed for it. You know, so, but the black people, if they had not adopted armed self-defense, they would not have survived. The Klan and the racist cops, who were many times one and the same, would have come through there and they would have just killed everybody if they needed to. You know, and they have had that history. They've killed, in the United States, 10,000 people or more. The Ku Klux Klan has since its history, throughout its history. And I lay this out to you so that you can understand the necessity of armed self-defense against an organization like the Klan. And there are other instances where black people formed militias, essentially what were militias, against the Ku Klux Klan. And so when the new leaders of the Black Panther Party came along, they were able to look at this. They were able to understand this process of this development and building their own movement. SNCC went over to Black Power in 1965, 66, and the ideas of Black Power swept the country. One is urban blacks in the North, which were pretty much left out of civil rights, but civil rights was totally a Southern thing. And pretty much a middle class thing, if the truth be told. The middle class movement. Whereas in the urban black people stuck in ghettos and so forth, Malcolm X resonated with them. His ideology resonated with them, and the ideology of black resistance, armed resistance if need be, whatever the case may be, resonated. And so the black youth rose up in rebellion against the white government. And there were 700, ultimately during that period in the 1960s and early 1970s, there were 700 so-called racial rebellions in that period, and something like 220, 250 people were killed during those rebellions. And that ranged anything from snipers to Molotov cocktails to, protests in the street. Everything was used in that period. And you can see pictures of even students at Cornell University, which is probably one of the most elite universities in the United States. You can see pictures of students with machine guns and bandoliers around their waist, fighting it out with the cops, because it was that kind of period, you see. And so an organization which had been a so-called nonviolent organization all of a sudden became Black Power, Black Revolution, and it started accelerating this political process until eventually the new Black Panther Party came into existence in 1996, 1966, 1966, and it merged with SNCC. It had the leaders of SNCC, the three major leaders of SNCC. Dr. Carmichael, as he was known then, I know somebody said, well, that's not his name, brother. That's what his name was then, when he was the leader of SNCC. And then there was H. Rap Brown and James Foreman. All of these were really outstanding activists and leaders. And many had been in the movement for quite some time, just in the ranks of the movement, until they, rose up in terms of leadership. But they were actually drafted, was the term that UAB used, drafted into the Black Panther Party. And this was done because SNCC had serious organizers. These were people who had been tested in the trenches in the South, in places where your life could be taken. And they understood also how to communicate with the black people in the South. And so SNCC was a very serious organization. Well, the Black Panther Party was new. It was untested. And they really didn't have any organizers at all in that sense, at that time, at that moment. And so they brought in this leadership from the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee. They had changed their name to the Student National Coordinating Committee. We won't quibble over that. But they brought in these major leaders out of that group into the Black Panther Party to train young Black Panthers in community-based organizing. And the thing that stands out about the Black Panther Party in the 60s is that, contrary to some cult that was led by one person and didn't do any work in the community, didn't touch the masses at all, the Black Panther Party was an organization of organizers, which was exactly what SNCC was when it existed. It was an organization of organizers. These were people who were going out in the community with real programs that served the people. People who were hungry, people who were subjected to white supremacy and all this. They had programs for that, and this was also taken up by the Black Panther Party and even accelerated. So the merger, 67, 68, into 69, was extremely important to the development of the Black Panther Party. It was terrified, it terrified the national security state, you know, the FBI particularly, but even the so-called CIA and the CIA and its so-called Operation Chaos, which was not as well known as the counterintelligence program, which ultimately was used to destroy the Black Panther Party. But those two agencies were working together, the CIA for international espionage and international subversion of the movement, to try to keep the movement pinned to the United States and not to come to the UK or not to go into other parts of the world and meet with other peoples. That was their strategic goal. And then the FBI, of course, which was designed to subvert the movement and destroy it from the inside with internal agents and so forth and so on. They were scared. Somebody said scared witness? No, they were scared shitless of the idea that SNCC would merge with the Black Panther Party, because it would certainly make it a much more serious tendency. And so they worked to undermine it. They tried to claim that Stokely Carmichael particularly, who was well liked inside the entire Black movement, they tried to claim that he was an agent for the Central Intelligence Agency, and that he should not be trusted, and so on and so on. And unfortunately, there was so much paranoia by this time inside the Black Panther Party, and there was also developing splits, ideological splits between SNCC and the Black Panther Party leadership at that time as well. He was drummed out, and that's very unfortunate. And he was angry about that, primarily because he couldn't believe that somebody else would accept the fact that he worked for a security agency. He'd given his entire life over to the struggle, and that was a tremendous error. But you know, you are in this struggle long enough, you will find that you make errors, and especially young activists who've not done this before. They're going to make mistakes. And what the FBI did, they made people pay dearly for it, made the movement pay dearly for these mistakes. So this was the first split in the Black Panther Party. But it was also, if you look at it in depth, the most important thing was that it also strengthened the movement so that it could withstand years and years of police surveillance and years of police terrorism. Now, all I'm doing is laying out a foundation so that you can understand. JoNina is going to talk in depth about the Black Panther Party itself. What I wanted to do was to get you to understand that there was what we call an antecedent, or a movement in advance of the Black Panther Party that was extremely instrumental for its development. And also that the Black Power movement actually came out of a previous movement. Some people think that the Black Panther Party created the Black Power movement. On the contrary, the Black Power movement created the conditions for the Black Panther Party to emerge. And this is one of the reasons why it's been difficult for anyone to come along in this period and claim that they're the Black Panther Party or the new Black Panther Party. Many have tried to do that. At least 17 groups over the last 25 years in the United States have tried to claim that they're the new Black Panther Party. And the reality is, you can only judge a revolutionary movement by what it does in the community. You can't judge it by somebody putting on black fatigues or black combat boots and strutting around the community and not have a program to deal with the material conditions. The Black Panther Party was extremely important primarily because it was able to meet the demands of the masses of poor people and black people in the United States. This is the reason why it's even remembered to this day. Not so much the gunfights and all this sort of thing. And the government didn't fear the Black Panther Party because of so-called gunfights and all that. They feared the Black Panther Party because it was able to build programs in the communities that the people fought to accept. People fought to defend, I should say. And from that standpoint, we are talking about a period, a process of social change. And it always comes this way. Like somebody thinks people just fall out of the sky one day and they all got on black fatigues and so on, rifles and so forth. You know, it doesn't happen like that at all. In fact, there was no guns at all at first. And so we look at this from the standpoint of this movement, the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Movement. The student movement actually birthed Black Power. The student movement actually created the conditions for the rising of the Black Panther Party. And the original Black Panther Party, Lowndes County and all of that, was created by the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee. So it's linked. And even now, some people in the United States, some sectarians, even from our own movement, don't want to recognize that. So, you know, but that's another story altogether. Main thing is, I'm setting it up for you so that JoNina can explain it to you in depth. Somebody said I was supposed to be talking about anarchism. Well, I can talk about that if you ask me. But basically, our tour has been about talking about, this is Black History Month. And we're talking about our role in the Black Panther Party and other organizations in the civil rights period. We're telling people how all this stuff came about. Some people think they know. Well, we know all about it. You don't have to tell us anything. And I would say, well, how in the hell do you know about it? I didn't see you back in those days, you know. No, we're living in a different time right now. And this movement arose based on the politics of that period. It was based on the 10 years of civil rights protests, so that Black people particularly were, I don't want to use the word indoctrinated, but they were certainly used to seeing Black people struggling. And that's important. If all you're used to seeing Black people do is get on the corner and sell dope or whatever, and this is all you're used to, then this is a different period, obviously. We talk about picking up the gun. Yeah, picking up the gun, brother. Pick the gun. Well, we understood picking up the gun. The gun was a tool of liberation. Now, when you pick up the gun, you're going to shoot somebody that looks like you, and you're going to engage in revenge, or you're going to engage in some kind of petty criminality. You know, so it's a difference. It's a big difference. And so youth movements today, and we're concerned about today as well. But to understand how, somebody said, well, you can create a Black Panther Party today and this will get the youth involved. Listen, let me explain something to you. There was a period in the process to create the Black Panther Party. That's what I'm trying to tell you. It may not be exciting, but it's a fact. Sometimes what's a fact is sometimes the boring process. Oh, my goodness, that's what happened? That is so boring. Well, that is what happened. There were people who went before, people who got killed in the civil rights stage, people who got jailed in the civil rights stage, people who, you know, put everything on the line during that stage so that even would be a Black Power movement. Or they may have been, not have been one. And it's so interesting and curious that the same people, primarily, that were in the civil rights phase are the people that produced Black Power, the next phase. Because the Black Power movement was merely, and originally, a transformation of the civil rights movement. So it's hard for people to understand that, and of course the American government and media don't want you to understand that. Because this is a key thing to understand. You know, a key thing to understand. This movement started out with nonviolence. And because of the murderous violence of the state and the murderous violence of white racists, like the Ku Klux Klan, but not just the Ku Klux Klan, because you had white civilians as well. They went to the next stage of Black Power and then Black Revolution. So I'm done up here at this stage. I'll come back and we can talk about whatever you want to talk about, anarchism, Black Revolution, we can talk about whatever. But we wanted to deal with, and I was a part of the civil rights phase. She came along later period. So we sort of complement each other. And thank you very much for listening to me.
development and what it did. The Black Panther Party was actually was a premier radical group of the Black Power movement. There were many groups in the Black Power movement. Was not just one group. There were many groups, but the Black Panther Party was, without question, the most radical wing of the Black Power. Represented the most radical wing of the Black Power movement. The Black Panther Party was actually started. Days the 16th of October. So the Black Panther Party was started on October 15, 1966. So yesterday was the 47th anniversary of the Black Panther Party. At the time, I myself was just starting college, and I really didn't know anything about it. I would find out about it later, but I didn't know about it then. And the Black Panther Party was started by two black college students, Huey Newton and Bobby Seale, in Oakland, California. Now, Bobby and Huey, neither one of them was originally from California. Their families had come from the South to Northern California. Their fathers had brought their wives and their children to Northern California to work in the military, industrial, they make military supplies, guns and things, beginning in the World War II era, and it continued after that. So Huey's family came from the southern state of Louisiana, and Bobby's family came from Texas. And Huey and Bobby were very influenced by the Black Power movement, and they belonged to different Black Power groups on the college campus, where they went to what used to be called in the United States a junior college. It's a two-year college. That's where they met. And what they saw that was happening was that in the city of Oakland, California, there was a sharp increase in police brutality against the black community, which was happening all over the country. The year before the Black Panther Party started, we had one of the major black rebellions in the United States in Los Angeles, California, the Watts Rebellion, which the Watts was a black community in Los Angeles. And that had occurred in August of 1965. In fact, that was probably my first awareness that things were changing among black people in the United States. When I first began to understand there was a Black Power movement, I was still in high school back then, and I saw that what you had in the Watts community was that a young black man had been stopped by the police. I'm not sure exactly, I can't remember what it was for at this time. It's a long time ago. But he was stopped and harassed and beaten by the police. His mother came to his defense. They wound up beating her, putting them both in jail, and the black people in that area were angry, and they just, they staged a rebellion that lasted, I think, probably almost a week, and some 35 or 36 people were killed, and there was a lot of course, damage to the community. But as I watched that as a high school kid on TV, I began to realize, wow, this is different from what Dr. King and the Civil Rights Movement was doing, because these black people are fighting the cops. And we had not really seen that on a big level. So that was kind of my first inkling that something was happening different that I hadn't seen before. So a year later, Huey and Bobby started the Black Panther Party in response to a lot of rebellions that were going on around, among black people, because most of these black rebellions started as incidents of police brutality. I don't care whether it was Los Angeles, later Detroit, Newark, New Jersey, Chicago. It was almost always an incident of police brutality, police killing or beating up some black people that enraged the black community, the poor, low-income black community where this happened. So there would be a rebellion. So Huey and Bobby decided that black people needed the right to arm themselves in self-defense against this. And Lorenzo's talked about the kind of stuff that led up to this period of, black people believing that the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee taking up the principle of armed self-defense. So they started the Black Panther Party for self-defense. The Black Panther Party had a 10-point platform and program. The initial focus was on point number 7. Point number 7 dealt with the right of black people to arm themselves, to defend themselves against police brutality and just overall government repression. Now, at that time in the state of California, where the Black Panther Party started, it was illegal for people to, at least adult people, to walk around with guns. It was perfectly legal to do that. And also in the United States, under the U.S. Constitution, the Second Amendment to the U.S. Constitution gives the people of the United States the right to bear arms. That's a constitutional right that American people have. So Huey and Bobby said, okay, we have the right to bear arms under the Constitution, and in the state of California, we also have the right to walk around with guns. So the Black Panther Party started conducting community patrols of the police. And what they would do, they would go around with their guns, and they would observe the police beating up or harassing black people. And they would inform the black community of their rights. They would say, hey brother, hey sister, what's being done to you is illegal. Huey Newton even wrote a little legal guide, even smaller than this notebook. They would pass it out to people saying, these are your rights are being violated. And they went all over, the sort of San Francisco Bay Area, which is in Northern California, with these armed patrols of the police. This was something that, had not been seen in the United States at that time. Black people had defended themselves against the Klan and had rebelled against police brutality, but they had never seen a group of young armed black men and women, because there were women in the Black Panther Party, played a key role. They had not seen something like this. Black people arming themselves, going around the community, advising people of their rights. You can imagine that the politicians in California and the police in California did not like this. It's like, what are we going to do about this? We've got these Black Panthers advising people of their rights, walking around with guns. So what they did was they changed the law in the state of California. They proposed legislation that would end people's ability to walk around. Anybody in the state of California could walk around with a gun. They were going to make it tougher for you to do that. So when they proposed this legislation, the Black Panther Party found out about it. So in May of 1967, what happened was an armed contingent of Black Panthers, men and women, sort of stormed into the California legislature, their headquarters in Sacramento, California, to protest this legislation. They just stormed in. Many of them were arrested, but they came to protest the legislation. And up until this point, the Black Panther Party was mostly a California phenomenon. But this particular incident of them rushing and storming into the legislature to protest the legislation, this made national news. And that's how I first found out about the Black Panther Party. I remember watching, I was finishing my freshman year in college by this time, and I saw this on the news. Now, I'm not going to lie to you. My initial reaction to the Black Panthers was that they're crazy if they think that white people are going to let them walk around with guns and give people legal rights. I thought they were crazy. I'm not going to pretend like I was a big advocate of the Black Panther Party at first, because I thought they were completely nuts. But I did join the Black Panther Party later. I changed my mind because I came to have a better understanding of what they were about. So ultimately, the law was changed in the state of California. But what happened was, by them going into the California legislature armed to protest this, by making national news, and you had young black people all across the United States heard about the Black Panther Party, and they wanted to join. So the party began to expand. Excuse me. The party began to expand outside of the state of California. You had chapters developing in Seattle, Washington, Chicago, Illinois, New York City, of course, Atlanta, Georgia, Dallas, Texas, North Carolina. Because black youth around the country saw what was happening, they wanted to be part of that. They were excited about young black people like themselves, essentially defying law enforcement police authorities, and the Black Panther Party began to grow. Shortly after this incident of the Panthers going into the legislature, shortly after this, Huey P. Newton, the co-founder of the Black Panther Party, he was arrested for killing one Oakland cop and severely wounding another one. And he had been riding around in a car with a friend of his, and by this time, the Black Panthers were under police surveillance, and they had recognized the car as being a car of a friend of Huey Newton. So the cops were basically harassing, Huey. And, what exactly happened, I wasn't there. I can't tell you what exactly happened, but at the end of whatever happened, there was one cop who was killed, one severely wounded, and Huey Newton himself was severely wounded. And the national news had a picture of him lying on a hospital gurney, bleeding rather profusely because he was badly wounded. So as a result, the Black Panther Party, the Black Panther Party began a Free Huey campaign because, he was facing obviously serious criminal charges. He was charged with killing a cop and wounding another one. And anytime you do that in the United States of America, and probably here in the UK as well, that's a serious charge. So we began a Free Huey campaign, international campaign all around the world. And by the way, if you go online and look it up, there was a Black Panther Party in the UK. And you can probably, if you go in your search engine on the internet, you can probably find out about it. There was a Black Panther Party here, and there were Black Panther parties in several other countries in the world, including in Australia. The Aboriginal people in Australia started the Black Panther Party. They were inspired by what the Black Panther Party did in the US. So, initially, the focus of the Black Panther Party was on armed self-defense. Now, everybody in the Black community did not agree with this focus on armed self-defense. Many Black folks, thought it was wrong. Armed self-defense was wrong. They didn't like the idea of the community patrols of the police. They didn't support it, and they criticized it. And the Black Panther Party was forced to kind of take a look at itself and what it was doing, and it never gave up the idea of armed self-defense, but it said, we call ourselves an organization that's trying to, better things for Black people in the United States. We've got to look at a bigger program. And it went to, it did have programs, it had survival programs, and many of those programs were based on the party's 10-point platform and program. I talked about point number 7, the armed self-defense, but point number 1 was, we want full employment for Black people in the United States. Black unemployment in 1966 in America was extremely high. The unfortunate thing, though, is it's even worse today now than it was then, and we may talk about that later. But it was certainly very high, so we were saying that, our people did have a right to full employment. We also talked about the right of Black people to have decent education, that we had a right to understand and to learn about the true nature of Black people's history in the United States. And at this time in the country, you had the development of Black studies programs at colleges and universities because Black students were protesting, rebelling, taking over buildings on predominantly white college campuses saying, you're not talking about the Black experience in America and demanding the inclusion of Black studies. So we demanded an education that would tell us our true history. We also demanded free health care, decent health care. We were not getting decent health care in the United States. We still aren't 47 years later. That's another story, but we certainly weren't at that time. And one of the earliest health care programs the Black Panther Party had was a program for sickle cell anemia testing. If you're not familiar with sickle cell anemia, it is a blood disease that primarily affects people of African descent, people from the Mediterranean areas like Italy and Greece, darker skinned people. The United States Health Department was doing absolutely no research on sickle cell anemia because it affected people of color, Black people. They didn't care. So the Black Panther Party started conducting free testing for sickle cell anemia. We started in Oakland, California. We did it in a couple of other cities. This was it was a serious health problem. Our people needed this testing, but also to raise the contradiction of how Black people were not getting proper health care. Diseases that affected people of color were being deliberately ignored by the U.S. federal government's, #1 health agency. We call ours the U.S. Department of Health. Now it's called the Center for Disease Control and Prevention. So we talked about that. We also talked about the need we demanded that all Black people in the United States, this was in the first version of our 10-point platform and program, we demanded that all Black people held in U.S. prisons and jails be immediately released. And we did that because under United States law, you're supposed to go on trial. If you have an offense, a criminal offense, civil defense, you're supposed to have a trial by a jury of your peers. That's the law in the United States. But what happened was Black people were not getting a trial by a jury of their peers. Their trials were mostly by white people, and they were being, convicted in great numbers. They weren't being tried by Black people or other people of color. So we demanded that. So these were these were parts of our platform and program. And then once we began to realize that many people in the Black community were not all that enthusiastic about armed self-defense, and thought, people want to know, are you going to do something that deals with the everyday material conditions of their lives? And people in the Black community knew police brutality was a problem, but it didn't necessarily deal with their everyday needs about, paying their rent, buying, food for their kids. Did they have a job? Could they get good health care? The armed patrols of the police did not directly relate to that. So we began to focus on what we call survival programs, Black Panther Party survival programs. And Huey Newton wrote that Black people needed to have survival programs pending revolution. They were to get us through until at such time as we could have a revolution. The Black Panther Party itself was not founded as a socialist or a Marxist-Leninist organization, but we were in favor of a socialist revolution in the United States. We wanted the U.S. government, the U.S. capitalist system to be overthrown. So Huey Newton said we have to have survival programs pending revolution. So we began to start some of those programs. Many of them were based on our 10-point platform and program. One of the ones that got the biggest support, actually was the first one, was the free breakfast program for children. And during the school year, when kids were going to school, between the typical school year in the United States is beginning of September through the middle or the end of June. So when the public schools were in session, the Black Panther Party would serve free hot breakfast to school kids in the different cities where we had chapters and branches. And I should say that the Black Panther Party was an anti-racist organization, but it was never an anti-white organization. So if a white kid heard about our breakfast program, they could come and get a free hot breakfast too. We did not exclude any other children of any other nationality or race. Any kid who wanted a breakfast would get one. We didn't care what the color of their skin was. Since we were primarily based in the Black community, most of the kids who got the breakfast were Black kids. And this program immediately got widespread support from the Black community. Black parents began volunteering to come in and help us cook the breakfast. We got donations from various supermarkets for the food. And they came in to support it because hunger and poverty was a real issue in the inner cities of the United States at that time. A lot of kids, Black kids, poor kids, would go to school hungry. And you can't learn on an empty stomach. That just makes common sense. So we sort of understood that. We heard about it, you know, and some of our own members had gone to school as kids on an empty belly. They knew what it meant because they'd gone through it themselves. So we were raising issues of hunger and poverty in the United States by our free breakfast program. Now, you know, at its peak, the Black Panther Party had 5,000 members, but obviously we couldn't feed all the hungry kids in the United States. But that program became very popular. Ultimately, it was a program that drew the attention of the U.S. Domestic Spy Agency, the FBI, Federal Bureau of Investigation. The director of the FBI at the time, J. Edgar Hoover, he characterized our breakfast program as being our single most dangerous program, which, you know, is ironic. You know, you're feeding hungry kids. What is dangerous about that? But, you know, J. Edgar Hoover was a racist and he hated the Black Panther Party, and he did everything to use his agency to ultimately destroy us. But he understood what we were doing. He understood that we were using this breakfast program to raise issues of hunger and poverty in the United States. And we did it very successfully, to the degree that now in the United States you have they have a free lunch program for poor and low-income kids. The federal government was forced to start the free lunch program because they were embarrassed by the Black Panther Party serving these free hot breakfasts. And we were glad when they started the free lunch program. They should have been doing it anyway. We couldn't feed all the hungry kids. But that's the legacy of the Black Panther Party's free breakfast program, that today in public schools throughout the United States, poor and low-income kids are able to get a free hot lunch. And I don't know, you may have something similar in the UK. I think I heard someone talk about that. But that was a legacy of our breakfast program, because we brought national attention to issues of hunger and poverty among poor and low-income people. So we had the breakfast program, we had a school, we started a school for kids ages 2.5 to 11. It's called Oakland Community School. I would work on the Black Panther newspaper at night. I was the last editor of the Black Panther newspaper, but I would do that at night. In the day, I would go teach at our Oakland Community School. I would teach reading, writing, and spelling. We started Oakland Community School because primarily Black parents, but also Hispanic parents, because Oakland, California has a large Hispanic population, were coming to us telling us that their kids were being suspended from school, expelled from school. The school authorities were saying that, you know, telling Black parents, your kids are too stupid to learn. We can't educate them. And they just kicked them out of school. And the parents were obviously very upset, and they came to us. They said they knew we had been operating a school for our own kids, for Black Panther Party's members' kids. They almost begged us, would you please open up your school to us, because our kids are being kicked out. They don't have anywhere to go. So we did. We opened up Oakland Community School. It was a small school. We only had room for 100 kids, but they were ages 2.5 to 11. And ultimately, the Black Panther Party received, it was ironic, we were educating the kids that were kicked out of the public schools, who were told they were too stupid. But we ultimately received an award from the California legislature for having achieved the highest level of education of public school age children in the state of California. Because our kids scored better on the statewide test. We did a better job than even the public schools were doing. But we were supposed to be teaching the so-called uneducable kids, kids too stupid to learn. So that was another one of our survival programs. And I'll just briefly mention a couple of others. We had a program, a busing to prisons program. In fact, that's one of the things that I used to do, drive. I joined the Black Panther Party originally in Detroit, Michigan, which we called the Motor City, the automobile industry capital of the United States. And we would once a month take people in the community who had family members incarcerated in prisons and jails. We would drive them to the prisons to visit their families. We didn't actually have a bus there, but we had cars. We would do that so that they could stay in touch with their families. It's important for prisoners locked up for long periods of time to be able to see their families and not lose touch. We had that program. We had a program for senior citizens. We would go with them to the bank to cash their pension checks. Back then, there was no such thing as direct deposit. You just got a paper check and you had to go to the bank and cash it. So those were some of the survival programs that we had, survival pending revolution. So that's kind of an overview of what the Black Panther Party did. Ultimately, the Black Panther Party was destroyed by the U.S. federal government. The FBI set up a counterintelligence program to destroy us. They sent in undercover informants to spy on us. They assassinated our members. They imprisoned many of our members. We found out the counterintelligence program was not just directed against the Black Panther Party. The Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee that Lorenzo spoke about and other Black Power groups. Dr. King himself was spied on up until the day he died. The FBI spied on him. So it was a widespread counterintelligence program. But we found out later on, because some people broke into an FBI office in the state of Pennsylvania, and we like to say they liberated some FBI files, but what we found out was that 95% of the FBI counterintelligence programs that were carried out between 1969 and 1971, 95% of those were carried out against the Black Panther Party, and which the FBI viewed as at one point they said the Black Panther Party was the single greatest threat to the national security of the United States of America. That's how they viewed us. So we bore the brunt of the counterintelligence program against the Black Power movement. Okay, I'm going to stop here. Lorenzo, you have some other things you want to talk about before we go into questions and answers?